It was never quiet in the way people think quiet works. After midnight, the university didn't go still. It changed what kind of noise it made. Air moved through the vents in long, soft vowels. The radiators sighed like old lungs, and the rain threaded through the ivy and slid down the leaded windows until every pane looked like it had been painted with milk. If you stand still, you hear the building counting you, your keys tapping your thigh, your shoes making the same shape of sound over and over, the heat of you pushing back against air that belongs to the room. That's what it feels like after hours. The place notices you. Most people don't stay long enough to recognize that feeling. I do. I took the night shift in the media office because that attention never bothered me, and because I told myself I understood machines well enough to make them behave. H201 was the room I liked closing most. The doors were tall and old and behaved like doors that had learned manners. When they shut, a low wooden sound walked up your arms and told you a boundary had been made. The stage boards had been polished by decades of nervous professors into a path you can slip into without meaning to. The fluorescents overhead, or the flat kind that make everything look like a photocopy of itself. Late at night, they buzzed with a thin, steady insect note you stop hearing until you notice it, and then you can't stop. The air always held chalk dust low to the floor, like a mist that never quite settled. My shoes picked it up and left pale shadows behind me that disappeared when the next draft came. The first night, the projector woke itself. It had been raining since dusk. The ivy looked combed. Water ran into the mortar lines like writing in a language the building didn't share. I pushed the door with my shoulder, listened to the hinge give its familiar little opinion, and crossed toward the light panel with my keys hooked on a finger. I was halfway there when the lens took a breath. There wasn't the boot logo or the brand as cheerful beep, just a soft intake, and then the screen above the board came alive with the room itself. The angle was wrong, too high, too still, like an eye set just over the back door where no camera had ever been. I didn't move. The image was too clean. The fluorescents on that side didn't smear. They looked new. The chalkboard was freshly erased, and the tray held a tidy seam of white dust, like someone had cleaned up to the edge of a thought and left it there. I looked at my phone. 12:01. In the projected room, the analog clock above the side exits said 12:03. It didn't. It seemed like enough wrong to matter. My stomach insisted it did. There are mistakes you can ignore and mistakes that notice you back. This felt like the second kind. I waited. You learn to do that with machines when they won't fit inside a diagnosis. Let them show you what they want. The projector S-fan didn't wheeze the way tired bearings do when they re-asking for replacement. It purred like it had found the right note for the room. The picture didn't glitch. At 12:03 by the screen's clock, the back doors in the image opened, and a person came in, hood up, hands shoved into the sweatshirt pocket, the exact pace of someone who knows all the squeaky spots in the floor. He crossed to row D, seat 11, sat for one breath, like a student testing whether the chair would hold, then stood, climbed the stage, took a piece of chalk and wrote one word in centered capitals, so neat you could cut your finger on the edges. Listen. The part of me that notices posture recognized mine immediately. The slight itch in the left ankle that shows up after a day with too many stairs. The way the chalk squares in my fingertips when I'm trying to be careful. If you've never fought the urge to mirror yourself, it feels like something has grabbed all your small muscles by the collar and tugged. I told them no, one by one. The light from the screen warmed the dust between me and the board, as if the picture itself had a temperature. At 12:03 on my phone, I blinked and saw for a fraction of a second the faintest bloom of the same letters on the real board, as if the slate had practiced the word for me and then thought better of it. I set my hand on the lectern and counted the screws along the edge like I was reading a rosary in a language made of numbers. Then I went to the breaker at the back. The handle wants 2 hands. It rewards you with a sound that makes most problems respect you. I pulled it down. The screen died. The fan spun down in a spiral that reminded me of toys that don't mind being put away. The pressure in the room, that sense of being watched by something that isn't a person, let go the way a held breath does when the body decides to live. I stood still to see if the physics I knew would send a note saying I misunderstood. Nothing came. The building went on, making the noises buildings make when they are alone and don't think anyone is listening. I told myself the next night would be nothing. Routine has a way of lifting its chin and telling you not to make a scene. I unlocked the door. The projector inhaled for me. No logo, no permission asked. The room looked back at me from the same impossible eye. Cleaner than here. Tidier. Like someone had ironed the air on that side. If I couldn't stop it, I decided I'd measure it. At 12:10 in the screen's room, the leftmost fluorescent bar trembled. A breath later in H201, the same bar fumbled and then forced itself steady in the way people pretend not to have stumbled. I had replaced those ballasts last month, knuckles raw from tight corners, every screw sunk down until it didn't sing. I felt the wrongness land in the place where pride becomes superstition. The chalk in the projection lifted and set itself down, as if a patient hand had taken hold just out of sight. The words formed with pauses between them like the chalk was minding its manners. Do not repeat. It hit the body like missing the top stair in a dark house you know well. I tried the remote anyway, out of piety, the way you whisper when you already know no one's in the room. The projector ignored me with the comfort only a machine can have in its decisions. I dragged the AV card out into the aisle and traced each cable like a lifeline I could pinch shut with my fingers. I unplugged one, then another. The picture stayed. At 12:12 on the screen, the next bar flickered. Above me in the real room, the second bar did a quick, embarrassed shiver and pretended to have been fine the whole time. The image's minute hand jumped the way a student jerks awake at their name. The real clock followed as if it had been waiting for permission. The back doors in the projection opened and 3 students walked in. I knew them without knowing them. The girl whose hair learns a halo from damp air. The boy who kneads his eyes with his knuckles, like he can press the tired out. The boy wearing a hoodie from a school 2 states away because that, as a flag, people fly when they were trying to become invisible. They sat like students sit. They pulled notebooks in that careful way that says they like to be thought of as the kind who bring notebooks. The real doors behind me didn't move. The room kept its shape. At 12:13, the usual electronic chorus in the real room stood aside all at once, and something settled behind it that felt like a person leaning into a doorway. In the image, the backstage door handle turned the smallest amount. A human hand turns it when the human wants to know if the latch will complain. The door opened by inches. The hallway beyond was darker than the hall ever is. A shoulder became an idea. A line rose into view, thin, precise, the kind of thing you call a pointer if you like words that keep the world ordinary. The line aimed at row D like a conductor's baton, finding the first downbeat. The handle in the real room clicked, a polite noise with a punctuation mark at the end. A long ribbon of clean air came through the crack and touched my face. It wasn't winter cold. It was the cold of the moment you open a freezer and remember the peas. I walked to the door like a person who knows how to make his own body look like a decision. I pressed it shut with both palms and let the latch tell me it had changed its mind. On the screen, the door closed a second later, almost sheepish. The pointer lowered as if satisfied. The 3 students in the projection did what students do when they've decided to look busy. In the real room, my breathing sounded like someone else's. I told myself I wouldn't come back the next night. I told myself lots of things I didn't believe. The projector saved me the trouble of choosing. The screen brightened like a lens had blinked. The chalk wrote another sentence in careful capitals, in the same patient hand. Do not teach. I sat in row D because defiance sometimes looks like obedience at a different angle. There's a worn groove there from anxious knees. My heart tried to drum a courage beat and kept tripping over its own sticks. Somewhere above me, a book hit a floor, and the sound made the ceiling ring in a tone the room seemed to have tuned itself to years ago. At 12:10, the left bar had its fit on both sides of the glass. At 12:12, the next followed. At 12:14, a hiccup ran the length of the center row. I took out a notebook, because ritual is a way to domesticate fear. 12:10, left. 12:12 second. 12:14 center. 12:17. Tap from the lectern, the precise wood touch professors use when they want quiet and don't want to scold. As I wrote the numbers, I hated the way the marks gave shape to something I hadn't agreed to invite. But the hand kept moving, like it belonged to the room more than to me. There was a night the rain stopped pretending it had somewhere else to be. The ivy slapped itself against the stone, like a person out of breath. The screen glowed too white. I climbed to the stage because there's a point after which waiting feels like making yourself into a corridor for trouble to walk down. The board stayed blank for a long minute, long enough for my ankle to tell me about a storm from years ago. Then he came in, that taller version of me, or just a version that had practiced being seen. He didn't go to row D. He put both hands on the lectern and lifted his head and met my face, as if he'd been waiting for this particular second. I don't know if you ever felt yourself called on in a class where you couldn't even pretend to have read. Your bones understand that feeling before your skin does. I went to the breaker because there are gestures that are better than speeches. The lever demanded strength and made the sound that strong things reward you with. The screen gave up instantly. The fans spun down in a soft, spiraling surrender. I sat in the last row and was surprised by how long it took for my hands to stop trying to make a fist. If this were a version of the story with a moral about confidence, that would have fixed it. The projector woke the next night with the friendly faith of a good dog that does not know it might bite. The board in the picture already had a warning printed in the kind of letters you pin on a shop wall near a blade. If you repeat, it repeats. I thought about recognition systems, the way we train our phones to know us by feeding them our faces until they can greet us faster than we can greet ourselves. I thought about mimicry and how it rarely stops where you want it to. I kept my hands where I could see them and waited. At 12:13, nothing happened with the door in the projection, and no pointer rose. The projector fan changed pitch and held it. If you've heard someone tune their voice to match a person they love, you know the exact sort of intimacy that sound carries. A not voice came through the vents, and it said my name the way my mother used to, from the bottom of the stairs when it wasn't urgent yet, but would be. The muscle that turns ahead moved like a dog going to the door before the leash comes off. I told it no and kept my eyes forward. I counted slow with my palms on the lectern until the minute became a place I could stand. The sound didn't come closer. It didn't need to. It let me go, which felt like mercy and also like being placed back on a shelf for later. Students brought me pieces of the larger story like magpies. A clip of a lobby window where the reflection moved a heartbeat before the person did. A girl on 4 who smiled at herself in glass and then had to make her mouth catch up. The kind of nervous laughter that asks you to join the joke because they don't want to discover they were alone. I told them the small, boring rules people roll their eyes at until 2 in the morning makes them believers. Blinds down after 2. Don't need to check your face in big class at night. Walk the east corridor with somebody else. The footsteps beside yours. Facilities added gray film to the long windows. I watched the way they pushed bubbles to the edges until the plastic lay flat, and I knew in a week the corners would lift like scabs because the room prefers its own reflection. Every building picks an hour. H201's hour started showing up early to see if we were paying attention. Some nights the lens would blink on before I had finished picking programs out of the seat backs. Other nights it waited until I let my shoulders drop and then came alive like a kid with a secret who can hold it. The image learned boredom. Sometimes it lagged a breath behind me, like a mimic that has almost mastered its subject. Those nights I moved slow on purpose, the pace of a person who is trying not to give their back anything to complain about tomorrow, and I waited to see who would lead. Daylight did what it does best. It made everything look harmless. The department chair asked if I was sleeping and hoped I would say yes. He told me his daughter had started keeping odd hours and staring at herself in windows in ways that made him want to call her in from the kitchen, even though she was already inside. We stood in clean hall light and looked like men who keep things humming. He asked me to keep an eye on the equipment. I told him I would. We both pretended we knew what equipment we meant. I tried to stop writing the times and could not stop my hand from finding a pencil. I filled a page and tore it and soaked the paper until the ink ran out like night, stepping down a drain. The next evening, my hand was already in my pocket before the door latch settled. 12.10 left bar, 12.12 second from left, 12.14 center, 12.17, a soft tap from the lectern. The list felt like prayer made of numbers and betrayal made of ink. The room felt taller when I wrote it down, like I had offered it a name badge. The night of the test was clear and hard. The stars looked like pins someone else had used on someone else's sky. The ivy lay flat like a suit laid out for a morning you aren't ready for. I had the room shut by 11:50, and I was saving the last switch because I like a neat ending. At 11:58, the projector woke with the certainty of a 𝗦𝘁selvfølg, who knows your name and your preferred table. The screen showed the room exactly as it was, not brighter, not scrubbed. I lifted my right hand. The man on the screen lifted his after me, not before. All month the image had led me. Now it followed. Relief and panic came together like twins who finish each other as sentences, and I didn't distrust either one. A moth drifted across the beam and tumbled, and then found itself again. I laughed once, quietly, because something small had passed through light and not been made into heat. At 12:13, the real backstage handle turned exactly a quarter and stopped like someone with manners who will wait to be invited. A long strip of freezer air slid out and across my shins. The screen kept perfect pace. The chalk lifted and wrote 4 careful letters, like a left hand that likes its own neatness. No, it should have felt like a win. It didn't. It felt like hearing your own refusal spoken back to you in your father's voice. From the vents came the throat clearing I knew perfectly. The exact pitch that used to warn me advice was about to arrive. Every part of me that knows how to be a son leaned without moving. I kept my hands on the wood and let the weight in my heels do the work my thoughts couldn't do. The room held its breath for a count I didn't like, and then the fans settled into their domestic hum, as if someone had hung an apron back on a hook. The door eased into the frame and became a door again. The chalk didn't erase itself. The dust halo around the letters looked like a small weather system that had decided where to live. I didn't sleep well for a week and didn't bother making up another reason. During the day, a freshman asked if I had heard about the elevator that opened onto a floor that wasn't there when no one stood inside it. A skater I would made peace with told me he'd seen his mouth speak early in a window and then had to hurry to join himself. He asked for the board back like he was trying out the idea that rules could be rewarded. It was 2 in the afternoon, and the hallway was full of human heat and laughter. That didn't de-echo wrong, and I gave it to him because acting like the place becomes a different animal at night felt like a betrayal of all the lungs that trusted it in daylight. Spring arrived in rumors and left in reminders. The grass behind the English building got soft for a week, then remembered traffic. The rain warmed, forgot, and became itself again. H201 in daylight was a citizen. 3 lectures in a row, a panel on local elections, where the microphones cleared their throats and learned the names. A poetry reading where a professor surprised me by treating silence like a word. At night, the projector has its own ethics. On nights it stayed dark. I loved the small dignities, sweeping the stage, setting the chairs in the straight rows, unplugging cables in the right order, competence as a shelter. On nights it woke. I let it do the first move and I made the second on purpose. And the 2 of us came to an understanding that depended on me remembering who followed who. If you're waiting for the part where I tell you how I fixed it, there isn't one. That isn't the same as giving up. I kept the breakers labeled. I kept the remotes with fresh batteries in the drawer with the blue tape. I kept my hands flat at 12:13, and I did not teach a room that learns faster than people. When the brave ones or the tired ones asked me the kind of questions that want a simple answer, I gave them practical rules. Keep the blinds down after 2. Don't stand in front of big glass at night and rehearse your face. If you have to use the east corridor, take someone else's footsteps along with yours. They nodded, grateful the way you grateful for a sign that says, slow children at play, even when you aren't a child. The last night of the semester, I turned off the house lights and left the aisle lights on like a runway that didn't actually want a landing. The projector sat and didn't make promises. I stood on the stage with my hands on the lectern and felt a sudden, precise gratitude for a lens and a chalk tray and 1,000 screws. I wanted to say sorry for something I couldn't name. At 12:01, the projector came alive and showed me the room and my empty hands already on the wood. I laughed because something about the timing felt like generosity, and also because laughter sometimes keeps you from saying something you'll regret to a machine. The board stayed clean. The door stayed shut. The vents breathed the room's normal breath. At 12:13, the clock's second hand hiccuped and then got on with its job. Mercy can be that small. I waited to see the minded hand shoulder its way to 12:15. Then I turned off what I could, left what wouldn't listen, locked the door, and walked into a night that did not try to recruit me. The ivy smelled like cold green cloth. Somewhere down the corridor, a mug tapped stainless steel and made the note it always makes when someone who works too late remembers they also live a human life. I passed the class without looking. If my reflection wanted to go first, it could go. I didn't follow. People ask if it stopped. Students want endings more than they want answers. I tell them the truth I can carry. Buildings have hours, and some of us get paid to stand inside the minutes and keep them from becoming something else. Attention can be cruel if it's hungry. Teach it the shape you can live with, and it behaves like a good animal most nights. I keep the batteries fresh. I keep the labels neat. At 11:58, I put my hands on the lectern and wait like a man who has chosen not to answer his name. Some nights, the room hums like a refrigerator in a house that isn't thinking about you. Some nights, a lens blinks like an eye, and a board feels like a mouth that has decided on a word. On those nights, I do the only thing that has worked without fail. I let the minute hand move first. That should be enough. But if you want the part I don't tell the students, here it is. There were nights after that last night when the projector did not wake and the chalk held still, and I stayed anyway. I stood in the aisle and listened with my hands empty. A long, cool seam of air slid from the backstage door across my shoes, like something breathing in a cave. I waited for the throat clear that isn't a voice and didn't hear it. I waited for the pointer that isn't a pointer and didn't see it. I counted to 60 twice, slowly, because a minute means more when you make it wider. The room behaved, which is to say, it acted like a room. I stayed 15 extra minutes for no reason that would look good on paper. I thought about writing the time down anyway, and didn't. I left, and I let my reflection go first for the same reason I always do. Not because I'm afraid, but because I am stubborn about the order of things. On a Tuesday, when the weather had forgotten itself and turned warm for no reason, and then apologized, I passed the lobby at 2 in the afternoon and saw a student stop before the long glass and adjust their hair, the reflection adjusted first by the smallest amount, the way a person repeats a word under their breath, so you want to hear them practice it. The student didn't notice. Why would they? The building keeps its hours. It was bright. Voices bounced around freely like children let out of class early. I told myself it was a trick of the angle. I walked on. There's a classroom down the hall with a clock that always runs 3 minutes fast. Facilities has replaced it twice. I mention it because people like to think time is a single rope you can put your hand on. It isn't. It is a basket of ropes in a dark attic, and most nights you are lucky if you grab the one you meant to. H201 lives at the place where the basket tilts toward 1213. On good nights, I stand with my palms on the lectern and let the minute pass through me without trying to catch any of it. On the other nights, I stand the same way and remember that if you repeat a thing long enough, sometimes it starts repeating you back with a better memory than you have. When I feel the urge to write the time, I don't. When I feel the urge to teach the room what I've learned, I don't. When I feel my name being called the way loved ones call it, softly, like we're both about to be practical. I keep my head straight and let the air move past. I still count the screws. The number has not changed, but the counting does something organizing inside me that I can live with. I still trace the cable path under the card with 2 fingers once, before I shut the drawer and lock it. I still check the door handle twice, and if the second check makes me doubt the first, I start over. I tell myself that's maintenance. It is also a liturgy. If a machine wants to act like a person, I will meet it with the kindness I have for people and the boundaries I have for machines. There is no blood in this story. No smashed glass, no sprinting, no shouting into the dark that becomes a confession. There is only a building that listens well and a man who, finally, learned to listen the way the building requires. When the rain comes back and combs the ivy flat, when the late lecture lets out and the last voice dissolves into the stairwell, when the last professor pretends they didn't even forget their water bottle and the door slaps its small echo into the hall, I take the keys from my belt and make the room ready. The projector may breathe, it may not. The board may write, it may wait. The door may learn the first inch of opening like a polite guest. The vents may find the exact pitch of a memory that knows my name. I will keep my hands where I can see them. I will move second. I will not repeat. I will not teach. I will be the person the room can have without appetite. If you come to H21 at noon, you'll see a place that belongs today. If you come at midnight, you won't, because the door will be locked and I will be inside, making sure the minutes pass one after another in the order we still prefer. Sometimes someone knocks and laughs and calls inside to a friend who isn't there. I wait. I listen for my own name and pretend I don't know it. When the clock says 12:15 and the air feels like it has given up on being a second set of hands, I turn off what will be turned off and leave what won't, and lock the door and walk away. I do not look into the glass. If my reflection needs to go first, I let it. If it needs to practice a smile I haven't learned yet, I let it. If it stands very still and waits for me to answer to my name, I let it practice alone. You asked for a scary story with mystery in every scene. The thing about mystery is that most of it is made of manners. The room has learned mine. I have learned the room's. That is how we keep each other. I will keep an eye on the equipment. I will keep the batteries fresh. If a lens blinks like an eye and a board waits like a mouth about to speak, I will do what I have learned. Stand still at 12:13 with my palms on the wood and let the minute make the first move. And if it calls me by name, I will be stubborn in the exact way that lets the night pass through without taking anything I can. Give. They numbered the rows in blue vinyl along the front edge of each desk. Neat block letters that caught the projector light and glowed like something clinical. In photographs, the lecture theater always looked larger than it felt. Gentle rake, pale wood, gray upholstery that made everyone's jacket look like it belonged there. On tours, they called it the crown jewel of the new building. The one with the glass atrium and the cafes that stayed open through the revision week. It smelled faintly of paper, hand gel, and whatever the cleaners used on the carpet that pretended to be quiet. I learned the room by walking it. You don't trust a seating plan until you've put your hands on the hinges, found the one that sticks, found the one that misbehaves when you're late for something else. I was the teaching assistant who checked attendance and kept the handouts in a plastic crate, the person with a highlighter behind my ear, and an apology ready for the student with a name badge that didn't match the register. The lecturer, Adler, liked an orderly room. He wore a dark jumper and took pride in starting on the hour. He didn't like mystery. He liked punctuality and syllabus and coaxing understanding out of a crowd. The first time I noticed the shadow, the projector had just warmed up and the screen was still pretending to be a soft square of sky. Students were coming in around me, helixing down the aisles in a way that looks chaotic until you see the patterns they make every week. I was standing at the front, ticking names without looking down. The back wall is a pale, matte paint that eats light rather than bouncing it. When the projector's lamp comes to full, it throws a faint suggestion of silhouettes on that wall. Rows of seated humps, the sort of thing you could blame on the angle of the beam. Every seat makes a ghost of a person, softer or darker, depending on who sits, depending on what color they chose to wear. Row G, seat 04, had a shadow before anyone sat in it, while the others bloomed and faded with coats and shifts and chatter. This one appeared as a clean cutout the moment the lamp brightened, as if someone had already been there and decided to pose. It was too distinct. Legs crossed, back straight, chin a touch forward, like someone genuinely interested in what you meant to say. I stood with my marker cap between my teeth and tried to tell myself it was the angle. G04 wasn't assigned. I make the maps and I can show you the PDF where the block is blank. There's a comfort in blank blocks. You can pretend they're generous. The first student to sit there didn't mean anything by it. Late first years never mean anything by it. They're just trying to create the least amount of noise. He slipped in after the second slide, without the courage to climb to H or J, and took G04 because it was empty, and didn't T require eye contact. I wrote his name down, and I might have underlined it. I can't tell you why. He took notes like someone on a train. On Tuesday morning, he didn't tap into the building. His car didn't open the turnstiles in the library. His flatmates told the porter he'd probably gone home, which is the phrase you give when you don't know and want to say something human. The teaching office sent me a note with 3 lines of bullet points. Student not seen in class. Guard inactive. Please advise if present. I wrote back that he sat G04 because that's what my brain offered up when I tried to name him. The email bounced in my head all day. It was the wrong kind of sentence. You shouldn't file a person next to a seat. The second week, Adler told the cohort to avoid G04 because we'd had a mechanical fault. He said it as if the chair might bite. Students laughed. They always laugh when a lecturer is almost joking. The room smiled with them, all fabric and wood and predictable climate control. If you wanted to picture somewhere safe to think, you should take a photograph of that room at 10 past the hour and show it to your mother. Next lecture, a girl sat there anyway. She didn't hear the request, or she heard and decided she wasn't the person who believed in other people as rules. She had her hair in a high knot with a pencil through it, and she smelled cleanly of citrus. I walked toward her with a hand half raised and then stopped because on the back wall her shadow wasn't hers. She slumped a little, the way we all do once the adrenaline of arrival leaves. But the silhouette was already upright. It sat forward like a good question. For a ridiculous second, I thought of a child's paper cutout, the sort you paste into a book to prove you were at the seaside. Would you mind shifting up one? I said, and kept my voice soft, all undertow. She did, good-naturedly, and whatever I would have called a shadow on the wall stayed seated for a heartbeat longer, then followed that movement like it had been asked politely. I didn't tell Adler. It's hard to say you've seen something when the thing argues with your vocabulary. Digital politeness that makes you feel like a job has already been done. Tuesday at 9, the seat still flipped down as smoothly as a new page. There was a tiny star-shaped scuff low on the inside leg, where a boot had knocked it. I told myself that meant it belonged to the ordinary world. If you keep lists long enough, patterns will try to be found. I went back through the attendance spreadsheet for past terms. Every semester, an unassigned seat appears. Not always G04, sometimes B02, sometimes an aisle seat nobody chooses unless they need to leave early. Some terms you can tell when a fad passes through and everyone wants the middle of row F. Some terms, the middle seat, is the one that annoys people least. In the gaps, the blank blocks seem to move. My stomach did me the favor of telling me it didn't like that thought. The next disappearance wasn't mine to log. I heard about it in the cafe from a lab partner who had the bored tone of someone who thinks a story is a story because it happened to somebody else. "He just stopped showing up," she said, stirring the foam into nothing. "No, not like lazy, like not showing up to anything. His flat says he took boxes. How many boxes do you take midterm?" She laughed on the end of it, like a girl who knows a laugh makes you less likely to fall over. When I asked if she knew where he used to sit in our lectures, she said, "Back left, wherever." I don't remember. I didn't either, and I hated that part of myself for pretending to the kind of omniscience it did to have. I wrote to Adler again. He doesn't like being frightened by the wrong things. He would rather be frightened by a drop in grades. He replied with a meeting request and a screenshot of the new attendance policy memo. "We can't start making superstitions," he said, when we sat with our paper cups on the edge of the raised floor, feet almost touching the front row. "Rooms don't do anything except what we do to them. Bolt the seat or put tape on it if you have to. Tell them it's for accessibility. No one argues with that." He nodded at the back wall while he said it, as if the wall were a colleague who needed convincing. I liked him then, without meaning to. It takes a particular kind of person to argue aloud with paint. We taped the seat with the blue painter, S-tape, and printed a notice that said, "Access 𝗦𝗁" in large letters, with a wheelchair symbol to make the point. Students snapped pictures of the sign as if we'd done something clever. The next day, the tape was lifted at the corners, not peeled, just tugged enough to give the impression of a thing losing its will. The fibers torn from the adhesive sat on the seat pan like lint. The problem with a pattern you can't name is that it works politely. A faint shadow on a wall, a seat that everyone else takes without comment. Records that look proper until you search a student number and get a patient electronic shrug. I asked the office to print me last year's seating maps from the archive. In the black and white grain of the printer, certain squares looked a shade darker. I told myself I was reaching because the human eye wants to win. The night before the first midterm, I sat on the stairs of the theater and listened to a hum that sounded distinct from any I knew. You learn the building's vocabulary when you work inside its hours. Air handlers have their cadence, projectors their small turbine sound. The lifts pretend to whisper. This hum had the pitch of a machine thinking. If UD asked me to point at its source, I would have pointed at G04 and been ashamed of my finger. I took the spare keys and tried the bottom panel of the seat, the hinge cover. Sometimes they come off clean with a flat screwdriver, and you can feel virtuous for sorting it without asking anyone in overalls. The screws turned without argument and then refused to drop, as if held from the other side by something with the light grip of a polite hand. I let them be. There are victories, you know, not to accept. On the morning of the midterm, the room filled with the sound every room makes before a timed event. Zips, coughs, the soft panic of pages. I gave out the extra pencils you keep for exactly this moment. Students arrange themselves in the ways you'd expect, seat gapping like a social geometry problem. The tape across G04 was bright. The Access 𝗦𝗁 sign shone with the confidence of a new rule. The back wall shadow had already chosen its posture. The faint clap of the first paper hitting the desk is a sound I like. It means the thinking has moved into the body. When Adler said, "You may begin," someone at the back had a proper wobble, bent double onto their paper, and a friend half lifted them out to the aisle. Without meaning to, a floater student slid into 𝗔𝗳𝗁 to keep the gap from looking like an invitation to cheat. The motion happened the way water finds the low point. I saw it too late. The shadow on the wall didn't wait for him. It sat straighter, already attentive, and when he leaned in to read the first question, the silhouette S head was a fraction ahead. I didn't run. Running makes sound, and sound makes rooms pay attention. I walked up the aisle sideways as if to see around people. My register held like a contraband tray. "Can you swap up one?" I said, tone soft, a hand hovering over the armrest, but not touching, because touching would be wrong. He didn't look at me. He looked at the clock. His hand on the desk twitched with the small arithmetic of decision. The desk S writing surface didn't. T move when he tried to tip it up, latched down as if suddenly remembering it was supposed to stay. Adler, at the front, frowned in the way that asks you to solve a technical thing without making him break the spell of the room. I reached down for the latch and found smooth plastic, nothing to catch. The hinge was slack, and still it wouldn't give. The projector's fan shifted pitch, almost unnoticeable, unless you know its repertoire. I felt the gentle pressure in my ears you feel when a lift passes floors. The little green timer in the corner of the screen jumped 30 seconds forward, then steadied. "Stand," I said quietly now, because the tone you use matters more than the word. "Don't go to the end. Turn sideways. Step into the aisle. Not forward, sideways. Now." He stood. For 2 wild seconds, his shadow on the back wall stayed seated, the legs still crossed, the back still straight. Then the silhouette jerked like a picture being pulled off a nail and matched him, a fraction behind, reproachful in its neat posture. He shifted sideways. The desk surface snapped up with a slap that made a neat row of heads lift, then lower in a ripple of pretend nothing. The timer on the screen shivered backwards, the space of the half minute it had stolen. He moved 2 seats up without looking at me. His face had the flat color of embarrassment. I wanted to apologize to him for something much larger than the inconvenience. I wrote a note on my register that said, "Latch for facilities," because I cannot write what I mean and expect an action. When the hour was over, the sound of papers shuffled in, a discipline that made me proud of strangers. The student from 𝗔𝗳𝗁 went down the right-hand aisle without speaking. He tapped his card against the exit sensor, and it didn't beep. The second tap didn't either. I pretended not to notice because failing to be recognized by a door is an intimacy you don't comment on. He pushed the bar and the doors opened anyway, because fire safety cares about different rules. Facilities answered my email with a cheerful, "We'll take a look," and an appointment window no one ever keeps. In the afternoon, the seat wore a metal plate at its base, and a bolt, like a promise. The tape drooped less. The sign looked comfortable in its authority. For a while it helped. Shadows came and went, and no one sat where they were asked not to. The thing about relief is how aware it makes you of your own bones. I stretched at my desk and felt old in the good way. I took a pen with a soft nib and underlined my own name on a form, because I had a human life outside the room. For a week, The attendance matched the faces. Then, someone in admin sent a quiet email asking if I could help a student named Mateo find a seat allocation he could keep. Complicated circumstances. Needed consistency to keep an accommodation active. I looked at the map, colored blocks and a traffic code the department insisted on, and saw that all the decent spots were taken. There were aisle places left and the low corner ones that make you stare up like a penitent. And there was G04, now a labeled absence. I wrote back and said, "I'll sort it," and then sat on my hands to stop them from making odd decisions. You can be superstitious about rooms and still be someone who helps students. I met Mateo in the foyer and led him to row F. He was thin in the way of boys who don to eat at proper times, and had the quick, defensive smile of someone who doesn't want you to think he deserves special care. I put his name on F06 and drew a little box around it. We shook hands. I felt more in control of the map than I had in months. That night I dreamt I was underwater in the lecture theater, and the shadows were made by fish that knew their own names. When I woke, my hands smelled faintly of the whiteboard cleaner we'd switched to that term. In the morning, the bolt on G04 had lost its nut and sat in the tray beneath like a found tooth. The metal plate hung a millimeter proud of the carpet. The tape lay on the seat in a peel that suggested bored fingers. I didn't touch it. I called facilities and left a message with my number and a thank you, and I meant the thank you. They have their own maps. On the last Thursday of term, the projector decided to play a joke I didn't understand. When the lamp came to full, the time stamped in the corner of Adler S. slides was 1 minute ahead of the room clock. It corrected itself while he was clearing his throat. He didn't notice. I did because I have learned to spot a minute misbehaving. I touched the edge of the lectern with 2 fingers, like touching the rail of a boat to see if it belongs to the water. We finished on time, which is the kindest thing you can do to a room full of people. I stayed after to tidy the sprawl of papers and to write a small list of who needed a word. The back wall looked innocent. I used that word on purpose. When the projector fan finally spun down, the shadow at G04 held a breath and then went. They never came back, the ones who'd left through the wrong door. Their names stayed in my head like pebbles. The systems handled their absence with a gentleness that made me angry, lapsed, inactive, withdrawn. When their friends emailed the departmental box to ask if anyone had seen them, they wrote in the apologetic tone of people who suspect they are making work for you. A porter said he'd help one mother call around. Admin told me not to talk to families. I didn't. I made fresh maps. I told Mateo to keep F06 for next term and wrote his name twice on 2 different copies so the scanner wouldn't doesn't forget. We moved teaching rooms for a week while they fixed something to do with cabling that had never made a sound until someone put it in a spreadsheet. The new theater was all right angles and white. I went in early to label the rows. A, B, C, the calm alphabet. The projector tested itself without being asked, and the silhouettes arrived obediently on the back wall, where the paint was slightly glossier than the front. There, just off-center, not row G because the alphabet had been psalmed into a new shape. A seated figure waited for the class to begin. I had a roll of blue tape in my hand and a folded Access ISIL sign in my bag. I stood at the front where the lecturer stands, because that gives you permission to put a sign somewhere. It doesn't want to be. I made an X of tape on the seat that matched the shadow, and the tape lifted under my thumb in a small, almost friendly peel, as if the adhesive had exhaled. I pressed it down again. It wrinkled. The tape always wrinkles if you press too hard in a hurry. There's nothing supernatural about poor tape technique. I smoothed it with my palm. It stayed long enough for me to walk back to the lectern and write "no seating" in a marker that smelt of something like peppermint. Adler came in and paused, just briefly, with his notes halfway out of his bag. He looked at the tape and then at me in the way a man looks when he is prepared to be cross about the wrong thing. I shrugged. He nodded, not at me, but at the room, like a person refusing to pick a fight. Students streamed in their ordinary clothes, with their ordinary faces, and the hour began easily, as hours sometimes do. I don't have an ending where I fix the room, or fail and get punished. It isn't that story. It's an account of how you live with a building that wants to remember you wrong. I can tell you what I do. I keep the maps tidy. I label things clearly. I tell latecomers to head up 2 rows and not sit on the end. I put my hand on a desk before I ask someone to move from it. I don't use the words I learned at night when I am speaking to the day. If you asked me what I did to stop it, I would say I didn't. I refused to teach the seat my name. I refused to complete the motion it wanted. I asked other people, when I could, to step sideways. Sometimes that was enough. On the days it wasn't too, I sat with the blue tape in my bag and the patience you learn from rooms, and I waited out the minute where the wall breathes and forgets and tries to take attendance in its own way.